He grew up. Okay. Okay. Let's see here. A native of Punjab, India, Pardeep grew up in Milwaukee as a former police officer and educated in the city of Milwaukee. Pardeep understands the difficulties of our communities face, both locally and abroad, both in and outside of his practice. Pardeep's passion remains one of healing and recovery. An example of this is Serve to Unite, an organization he founded in response to the tragedy. This organization engages youth and communities at large in service, learning, artistic response, and global engagements to build positive school environments and peaceful communal identity while addressing conflict from a trauma informed lens. Over the past 5 years, the work of Serve to Unite has been locally and internationally recognized as the recipient of the Guru Nanak Award and the Parliament of World Religions for the work of building safe, inclusive communities. Partnership organizations include Arts at Large, Against Violent Extremism, the Forgiveness Project, Interfaith Council of Milwaukee, and Not in Our Town. Without further ado, I want to thank you, and let's all appreciate and show our acknowledgement to Pardeep Singh.
Thank you so much, Randall. And I want to thank Rid Racism, Micah, and everyone that's on tonight. Thank you so much, Kenneth, for the wonderful introduction to the work that Rid Racism does. Sue, Rose, Ellen, I miss you all. Anita, Laura, Judy, Jesus, thank you for being on. Jesus, thank you for being on. Liz, Jaime, Carol, Lisa, Lalitha, I promise I will get back to you soon. Send me another email. I am very, very, very sorry. Art, great to see you again. Yeah. Where you are, Art. Hello, hello. Carrie, EC, Andy, Floyd, thank you for being on tonight. Brenda, thank you for being on. Mari, Marilyn, Reverend Miller, Pamela, Scott, and I thought that I saw Joe and Joyce were on. So thank you so much for being on tonight. Yeah, I want tonight to be just Randall. You know, we'll keep it a conversation. We'll keep it a discussion. I thank you for reading the book, you know, twice, and your thoughtful questions that you already sent me. So Randall and I have had a great discussion already. The one last thing I'll say before we do get into the discussion is just today is the year anniversary of George Floyd being murdered, and you know, I know that most of us can think about a year ago where we were when what we felt in the work that we do when we heard about it or saw it on sadly on our internet or TV screens. And we might be wrestling with heavy hearts, some more than others, just depending on the level of communal trauma that something like this has on particular communities, right? When we see somebody that we identify as someone that has our same skin complexion or ethnicity or religion, or, you know, it hurts at a deeper level. So I think let's be there for let's be great allies and be there for other people, and make sure that we're praying in and we're being hopeful. I'm encouraged by some of the work that has been done in the past year, and I'm encouraged by, you know, the daughter of George Floyd, and they did an interview with her and asked her what she wanted to do when she grew up. Obviously, we heard the line where she talked about her dad changing the world. And, you know, what inspired me is that the 6-year-old, even after her dad's murder, said that she wants to grow up and be a doctor. And she said she wants to do that to help people. And I think that that is something that calls on all of us to go ahead and recommit ourselves to the work that Rid Racism and Micah does to help community heal. So again, thank you so much for having me on tonight, and it's an honor.
Thank you for participating. Um, we do have a couple of structured communication agreements that I'm going to have Liz read over. So things, because this is a highly emotive conversation, and we just want to have a basic structure here. You see the agreements in our chat, and if we can have everybody abide by those so we can proceed in a equitable and civilized manner, we greatly appreciate it. Yes.
Thank you, Randall. So my name is Liz Caldwell. I'm going to be helping Randall with the discussion, being a timekeeper. Please keep your comments short, just so that that gives everybody equal time. I'm going to be timing you. If you go over a minute or so, or if you seem to be wandering, I'll just ask you to please kind of get to the point so we can leave room for other people to talk and to ask Pardeep some questions. So please refrain from using any profanity, sexually explicit or vulgar language. I'm sure none of you would do that, but we just want to say that. Please use I statements. Speak for yourself, from your personal experience. Don't speak for a whole group, a generation, a neighborhood, and don't ask others to speak or explain for an entire group. Be specific and avoid making big statements or sweeping generalizations, and instead connect your beliefs and your experiences and your influences in your life to what you are saying. Please listen to understand rather than criticize the views of others or to persuade others to adapt your views. Please take time to talk and not interrupt others unless you cannot hear the speaker. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that, and just keep your comments or your questions brief so that everybody can participate in the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. Pardeep, as we proceed, can I have you read a passage of the book? And that is, I think, the crux of the matter here, and share with our listening and participating audience.
Sure, Randall. And just to make sure that we're doing it on the shooting, chapter 6, 142. Okay. All right. So I'm going to read from 142 to 146. This is the actual day of the shooting, which is Sunday, August 5th. And this is as I'm getting my kids ready for church, what we call Sunday school at the Gurdwara. So thinking about Sunday school over at the church would be very similar to this experience. I quickly fell back into a spectacular mood that the picture-perfect Sunday brought. The kids were giggling in the back seat, and I jammed out to the music playing in my Bluetooth. The music and the sunroof were wide open, and the wind felt warm on my face. Coming up on our exit, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw a riot of flashing lights. There had to be a dozen police cruisers racing up behind us. I responded to my share of emergencies when I was a cop, but I found it alarming that they were weaving through traffic at such a dangerously high rate of speed. I pulled over to the shoulder to allow them to pass. As they did, I noticed squads from several different jurisdictions. I thought to myself that whatever the emergency, the response seemed a bit dramatic. The posse of police cars exited the highway ahead of us and quickly sped out of sight. I drove on, hoping that whatever occurred wasn't too serious. When I reached my intersection, I saw a large black police SUV barricading the road leading to the Gurdwara and an officer redirecting traffic away from it. I explained that I was taking my kids to the temple for Sunday school. Can I pass through? I asked. The officer shook his head stubbornly. There was a shooting nearby at the scene, and the scene was not secure, he said. No one was getting through. My first thought was that a cop had to be shot. I asked if he knew an alternate route to the temple. I didn't know another way there. No one is allowed near it, he said. There's been a shooting. The scene is not secure. The officer's words were crystal clear, but I asked him to repeat what he said. I told him that both of my parents were at the temple. Dad was president and mom always arrived early on Sundays to help prepare food for the langar, our communal meal. He seemed sympathetic, but he had concerns of his own, such as keeping people away, people like me. Was a shooting at the temple? I asked. Like 10 minutes ago, I'm sorry, he said, returning to his work. I understood his reluctance to engage in more conversation, but questions were pounding in my head like a bad migraine, and I needed answers. I pulled into the grassy area off the intersection and parked the car. Feeling panicky, I told myself I had to stay calm for the sake of my kids. I was only parked for a minute or two when a friend called and confirmed my fear. He said that he had just heard there was a shooting at the temple. The temple was now on lockdown. Were my parents there? Had I spoken to them? Yes, they were there, I said, feeling nauseous. No, I hadn't spoken to them. The phone didn't stop ringing after that. The next call was from Jaspreet, my wife. Trying to stay calm, she told me she had just spoken to my mother. Mom was whispering. She said she was hiding in the pantry in the kitchen of the Gurdwara with about a dozen other women. They had been cooking when they heard what sounded like gunshots in the distance. But they dismissed it, thinking it had been something else. A moment later, two kids who were outside playing at the temple ran into the kitchen crying that there was a man outside with a gun. Mom grabbed the kids, and everyone who had been in the kitchen pushed into a tiny pantry, the only place to hide. Just as they were about to close the door, a woman ran in, bleeding, saying she had just been shot in the main entrance. Mom told Jaspreet, my wife, that she tried calling me but couldn't get through. She would try me again, but I shouldn't call her number because any sound could tip off the shooter or shooters to their hiding spot. They're out there, she had said ominously before hanging up. I took as many calls as I could answer, hoping to get more information. When the number on the caller ID was my father's, I quickly switched on my Bluetooth. Dad, I cried. My heart dropped when the voice on the other end was not that of my father, but what it was of a head priest, Gurmail Singh. His first language was Punjabi, but I understood enough to know that he was saying my father had been shot. It was serious and he needed help right away. I told him, please put my father on the phone. He can't talk right now, the priest replied before the line went dead. My heart hammered with anxiety. I cupped my face in my hands. My father had been shot and my mother was in imminent danger. I felt completely helpless and didn't know what to do. Just then, I heard whimpering in the back seat and remembered that my kids were still there, that they had heard everything over the Bluetooth speaker. Amherst was crying and Jay was mad. Dad, he said, I will get the bad guys. Suddenly, it occurred to me, if Amherst hadn't forgotten her notebook, we would have been there at the temple. I switched the speaker off and turned to comfort my kids. In all of this confusion, I had noticed that the others were gathering on the grass. I was grateful to see the familiar faces of some of our family members and friends. I spotted my cousin who taught Sunday school at the temple. Watch the kids, please, I said to friends. I told Kanwar I thought we could make it to the temple through the woods. It would be quite a distance with no set path, I suspected, but it was worth a try. He agreed. We couldn't just stand by idly.
Thank you for reading that. And I know it must be very difficult to relive and rethink about those moments, if you will. And I greatly appreciate your uh, reading those thoroughly and being sensitive enough to and sharing your thoughts as well as your feelings and things like that. My first question is going to come from one of our board members, and this deals with one of the pervasive themes throughout the gift of our wounds, and that is the notion of hurt people, hurt people. And the question reads this way: what can we do so that the public resources are devoted to preventing and treating hurt rather than chasing after bad actors in order to punish them? And what can we do to change the perception of those who focus the problems of crime as being due to bad people?
Both are very profound questions. And yeah, I think the notion of hurt people, right? And we know that there's a lot of people who may be hurting, who don't hurt people. First and foremost, we need to recognize that there's people who can process their pain in somewhat healthy ways. And so I think as a society, the answer to both those questions is that we have to rethink what our society and how our society was created, and then be deliberate in changing the trajectory going forward. Meaning that our society was created and at its foundation still has a very punitive mindset, meaning that we can only punish a person into being a good actor, whatever that means, or being, not being a bad actor. And I think that what we need to do as a society is really get to a place where we understand the role of mental health much more than we understand it now. And I've led a couple of careers in my life. I've been an officer, I've been an educator, I've been a public servant for most of my life. And I think that one of the ways that I see it is that we need to develop an integrated mental health approach. And what this means is that each and every one of us is maybe not a clinician, but we are a mental health ambassador. We each are taking care of one another. We each are sharing, and we are building community. And sometimes a person, for people to heal, and for society to heal, and for communities to heal, we and really like get in the way of that work, that hurt work, is to say, let's build a healthy village, right? And not to say that Milwaukee hasn't been a healthy village, or some other communities have not been healthy villages, but over the years, we have seen, for whatever reasons, for many, a plethora of reasons, us get away from being a village. And our children right now, and Ken, you talked about this as far as that intergenerational piece of how do we bring, right? We have such wisdom in Milwaukee. We have such wisdom and people that have been doing this work for such a long time. How do we bring that wisdom of the well to the living water of the youth that right now need it and might feel disconnected, right? And they're going through, the kids right now, and I say kids, and I think the kids right now that are, you're like 15 or in their 20s, have grown up in the digital age. they have grown up being reinforced that their value is with likes and with shares and with people saying like good comments to them. They haven't developed a really authentic value of self. So when they do some of the things that they do, right, part of why they do what they do is because they're hurting that they haven't developed that sense of self, that healthy sense of self-esteem. And so they can be manipulated. And so I think, yeah, just as we go forward, all of us need to understand all of our roles within this society. And I'm going to come back to the George Floyd case really quickly. When George Floyd happened, there was, I think it was 3 officers who were standing around and witnessing pain. And this would, like, people can go into whatever if they watch it, I understand. If they didn't watch it, I also understand that too, because sometimes you can't watch that level of trauma all the time without being like super, like without taking it in. But I think about those police officers who were sitting around and not like, kind of like bystanders. And I think about how many of us sit around, not here, right, but isn't in a society where we see pain and are inactive witnesses. So what we need to do as a society is get better at listening to pain and then doing something about it. Not be offended by pain. And there's a lot of people who get offended by pain or project pain or say, well, it's not my fault, it's my responsibility. Or, or they become overwhelmed by pain because now being overwhelmed, you take it in all the time as well. But then you're not. So either way, we become sort of bystanders of pain. Yeah. Great question, by the way.
This is a follow-up. Mass shootings are pretty much a relatively new phenomenon. Um, in your estimation, do you think as a society, we become too desensitized to it? And it almost becomes in and out of the media when 5, 12, 14, in Las Vegas a couple of years ago, 40 people are shot and injured. And their shock factor no longer exists in my estimation. Have we become a little bit too desensitized to it?
Sure. Yeah. I think, Randall, we've become that, that frog in the boiling water that can't jump out and can't see and can't tell how much we're living in that misery of just, sustained misery. If you were to think about mass shootings now, depending on how you define it, right? Depending on the length of definition, and people have gone to various links to have like different definitions. So the longer the definition, the number of mass shootings starts to go down. I'm just going to use this one that maybe we can just agree upon and say, okay, let's define a mass shooting. If you identify a mass shooting as 4 or more people being shot in a single incident, okay, and if we just accept that, last year, the number of mass shootings that we had was 600. Most of those did not make the news, or they made it to the local news of wherever it happened. They did not make it to the national news. So yeah, this prolonged, sustained like existence in this misery is leading to us normalizing it. And each year, you see the numbers start to go up. Now, people have become creative with this to say, well, now I identify a mass shooting, or I define a mass shooting as 5 or more people being shot, 3 or more people being killed, one of them not being the suspect. So yeah, the longer you make the definition, the more it goes down. But if you just accept 4 more people being shot at one incident, which is a pretty simple definition, then you had 600 last year. My fear, and it's not that I fear for myself, but I fear for our future generations who are going to inherit some of these messes. Right? When we instituted the First Amendment of freedom of speech, how long did it take for something to get from one person to another person? Sometimes months. Sometimes mail carriers would have to, well, sometimes it never got there, right? So now, if you send something to somebody else, before you can even retract that statement or say, hey, I didn't mean that, before you can even edit it, it's already out there. It's in real time. It takes a split second. So I want you to think about that. Of when we enacted the First Amendment, it took us how long to get some communication to one another person. Now, when we enacted the right to bear arms, let's think about the firepower that we had. The firepower that we had was we would have to load up a single shotgun, and it took us, if we were good, it took us 20 seconds. And then it didn't travel more than like 20 yards. And it was rarely accurate. Now, fast forward to today, 2021, we have firepower that would rival any other country in the world. And people are just stockpiling it. Right? So when we want to say we have constitutional freedoms, and we constitutional freedoms when they were founded, right? We have basically communication of mass destruction combined with weapons of mass destruction. And we cannot be surprised that there's more than 600 shootings per year. And the people that are saying that we need freedoms, or we need to protect our freedoms, do we really feel free right now? If we can't go to a place to worship, if we can't go to a movie theater to watch a movie, if we can't go to a shopping mall, nor can our kids go to schools without going through traumatic drills of active shooter lockdown, when every corporation is being trained on what to do if there is an active shooter there, how free are we really?
Thank you. A follow-up question is coming from one of our Rid Racism board members, Sue Bartenstein, and I'll read it. And I think you and I had previously discussed this here. And it reads, Pardeep, you have a unique perspective to offer us. What institutional or structural changes would you like to see in education, government, policing, religious institutions, medical, nonprofits, to address what you see as white supremacy?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think, well, let's start with education. I think just education itself is flawed the way that it is right now. And I don't think that it caters to everybody. It caters to the certain type of learner, and not everyone learns the same. We know that sometimes children of color, and white children learn differently. And I think what we need to do is start to meet people where they are, meet students where they are, and make sure that we are teaching with that in mind, of saying, you know what, control and order and all of these things, that's fine to an extent, but we also have to create creativity. We have to nourish creativity, because we're going to need these kids to be the solution going forward. They're going to need to be creative. Another thing is that I think that the model of teaching or education that we all kind of grew up in was, we would have a few resources, and the resources would, let's say you had a project that was due, or a paper that was due, that talked about World War I. Now you would have 3 resources available to you, and you would go to the library and you would get those 3 resources, and you would rent them for 3 weeks, and you would try to expound, meaning you try to expand the body of knowledge that you have. Students have a completely different problem now. They're not trying to expand the limited amount of knowledge that is available to them. They go and Google World War I and see how many things come up on their search, right? Millions of articles, millions. So they don't have the problem of expounding or expanding. They have the problem of saying what is good, what is healthy, what is believable. So education cannot be the same as it was 30 years ago because of technology. They have so many resources available. We have to start to teach kids not the facts that they need to know, or nor the, the tests that they need to pass. They need to find what is credible, what is good, and what can they trust. Because that's really what's missing right now. We have a society. The editor of the Journal Sentinel was talking about this, that 40 years ago, you had a trusting society. Yeah, there was lots of ills. There was lots of, racism was much more, even like it was in your face. It wasn't as subtle as it is today. But at that time, you did have people who trusted what newspapers were saying or media was saying. Fast forward to today, lots of people don't even trust facts, right? And that is the issue that we're having. We have a lack of trust within a society, and even as we go forward, there's conspiracy theories galore, and that are ruling the mainstream sort of narrative. It's not even fringe anymore. It's not the fringe elements that are like, you have major political candidates and elected officials who are espousing conspiracy theories, and people are like, yeah, I believe that the world is flat. Yeah, I believe I can drink bleach and be cured of this COVID. Oh, but I can't trust the medical professionals. Now, we have gone wrong. And I think that within educational facilities, we need to regain and say, you know what, we need to create trust. Within our law enforcement entities, we need to create relationships. We can't have a disconnection between, the police department and the community. That's just not going to work. We need to rethink even policing in general, and what are the capacities of a police officer, and what are the capacities of a social service agency. Because sometimes you don't want to bring a hammer to something that you might need to finesse, and sometimes within law enforcement, certain officers are really great. Certain officers can really perform the social services part of policing, but there's other officers who cannot. And so within those entities, I think they need to be accountable to themselves and say, let's weed out these bad police officers who cannot do this job anymore. And somehow, some way, let's get rid of them, because it's not for the public good. Nobody benefits when you have a bad police officer who is misusing power, who doesn't understand that it's not about power over, it's about power with. And if a police officer has the mindset and comes in, or is so traumatized within the job that they have a power over model, that's not a good police officer anymore. And they're ineffective, and they need to be held accountable, and we need to be able to get rid of them as fast as possible. Good example of that is in Wauwatosa, right? We had an officer who shot and killed 3 people. That's a bad police officer. Those people need to be held accountable, and you need to somehow, some way, for the public good, get rid of them. And I think within all of these institutions, as we go forward, really think about, again, I'm going to say this word till everybody's exhausted, but having an integrated mental health approach, meaning corporations need to understand the well-being of their employees and be doing as much as they can to nurture the health of their employees. Their employees are not just just something that's expendable and brings in revenue. They're your family. Treat them like family.
Thank you. So we follow a question, and this deals with what the University of Wisconsin-Madison is doing, my alma mater, by the way. Um, it has a prejudice reduction lab. It views prejudice as an implicit bias, as habitual ways of thinking that requires habit-breaking intervention. What are your thoughts on how to address prejudice that can fuel to incite violence against
Mhm.
others?
Yeah, that's a great question, Randall. Prejudice as an implicit bias. I agree. I think that there are things that people within all of us, we pick up on society's sort of conditioning of worth or lack thereof. We pick up on society sort of like as men, we're conditioned to think a certain way. Um, it's just it's the soup that we exist in, so we become that way. And then I think we have a responsibility to come back and say, huh, maybe the way that I was conditioned is leading to the harm of somebody else, no matter who we are. And this is like for lots of people, they might not identify it as, who you are or who you've been conditioned to become is harming them. But I would say to an extent, we all do have a propensity to cause harm. And what we need to do is we need to come back and say, what do I do about that now? Maybe my own like journey to forgiveness means I need to forgive myself for learning that way and being conditioned that way. And who have I hurt? And who do I need to apologize to? And how do I come back to being myself? For those that the prejudice can lead to extreme acts of harm, right? And I won't just say just the small acts of harm, because we again, like, we all need to accept that we all have good and we all have bad, and we all have a propensity to cause good and cause bad depending on who the person is that we're talking to. Sometimes we cause good to the people that we care about, but bad to the people that we might identify as the other. um but for those that have a propensity to cause deeper harm, and I think we need to also understand the role of personality and different personality types. So within my journey within this mental health world, I have noticed a few things that sometimes I look out for within the mass shooter world. And I hate this, like, it's like there's things that you should look out for in kids. And one of those things that I think we need to look out for within personality types is the internalizers. And so if you see a child who is deeply like affected by something that maybe is not as serious to another child, that child is known as an internalizer, meaning they take things super sensitively, and it hurts them to a core place. When another child, and for those that have children and that have multiple children, you'll be able to identify this in your children and say, okay, which one of those child is super sensitive? Which one of those children doesn't really take it to heart? Like nothing bothers them too much. I'm not worried about the ones that aren't bothered too much by it, right? I'm not saying that they're apathetic, but the one that really, really, it hurts them to the core, what happens over time with them is that they have a different type of shame mechanism, meaning that if they do something wrong, they don't feel guilty. They feel a sense of deep shame. And shame oftentimes causes a person to be either silent or causes them to run from it. And so when I'm looking for those that might have a propensity to commit really dangerous acts of violence, I look for some of that, of like, how did this person handle rejection? How does this person handle shame? How do they like, and one of the skills that we really need to teach boys, because I'm going to say that a lot of the people that commit the most violent acts in this country are men, right? So I mean, that's just it's well known that it's typically men. And I think that we need to teach men how to handle, we need to teach boys at a young age, how do you handle rejection without taking it so to heart, without feeling like it's a rejection against you rather than just what you did. right? And so as we condition, as we talk about school and as we talk about growing up, I think it just plays a different role now of saying every educator has to be teaching, every educator. Like if you're teaching math, you should still be teaching social emotional growth. If you are teaching US history, geography, you are still teaching social emotional growth. You're not just teaching subject matter anymore. You're talking about, okay, and each teacher, and I'm not trying to put more on the teachers because teachers have enough on their plate, but you are a parent, you are a counselor, you are a caretaker, you are probably in that child's top 5 people that mean the most to them, and you spend the most time with them. So we within education need to understand the responsibility of educators.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll open this up to everyone. And this is actually from one of the participants, Floyd Goodson, who's in Atlanta, Georgia. And he poses the question: is it possible to teach kids to be critical thinkers starting at the beginning of their education?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it is. I think the faster that we can get a kid, so consciousness is something that is not a skill that we really think about when we think about education, right? To have a kid who asks why. I know back in my days when I was growing up, you had a kid that asked why too many times, and oftentimes you were like, "Man, that kid is annoying." Right? It's not to compare him to like Socrates, but Socrates was put to death because he asked why so many times. Right? but I think there's I mean, different kids will understand different things at different times. And again, like certain kids, but the faster you can have them question the why of the action, I think that leads to critical thinking skills. So oftentimes as an educator, we should be saying, hey, why did you do that? What made you do that? And have them kind of come back and say, and I know that it's tough for any, like, let's just use a 12-year-old, for example. A 12-year-old in my class gets into a fight with somebody else. In the moment of that fight is not the best time to ask that kid why, right? First, you want to just split them apart and say, okay, listen, da da da. Here's one thing I used to do as a teacher, and I was working with what the state labeled at-risk high school youth. These kids were behaviorally, academically, sometimes both challenged. I was working in 5 through 206, and so most kids that I served were from 5 through 206. Most of them were 15, 16, 17, sometimes a little bit older, right? And one day, 2 kids get into a fight, and they get into a fight, and then I'm like, okay, come meet me after school. So they both come after school, and I sit down with them, and I'm like, why did what made you do that? Why did you do that? Why did you do that in front of me? I felt kind of disrespected too, because I'm like, you guys cut up in my class. You guys could have cut up in Mr. Ali's class, or you could have cut up in Miss Caldwell's class. You guys don't need to cut up in my class. I'm teaching, I got all in my feelings, right? And then just have them think about it, right? So they think about why did I do that? Why did what was going on? So then I would take them apart, right? And I would talk to one at a time. And when you get somebody individually, then they start to open up a little bit. And especially that person has had, now you gave them an initial place to think about that. And what I would do as an educator was I would get to know some of their stories before the first day of school. So I would be like, hey, Mr. Alvarado, I know that you're going through some tough times at home, and I know that you transferred here from, wherever, like Mesmer, and I know you got in a few fights over there. You're kind of a hothead, this thing that I'm not saying that. I mean, I'm not picking on you, but I would get to know you a little bit, and then all of a sudden, they would say, "You care enough to know me. You cared enough to know me before my fight." And now you got me in the separate room and you want to know why. Mr. Kaleka, you know why? Because I'm witnessing something at home. And when I see it, that's the way I'm conditioned to act. If somebody disrespects me, that's what I know. I'm just telling you, like, so now I'm like, okay, this kid has identified the why. They've developed critical thinking. And now the next time, and then you have that conversation with them. Okay, how do you feel, Mr. Alvarado, when you witness that in your house? Yeah, you feel like shit, don't you? You don't feel good, do you? And now I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, like, can I elicit empathy? How do you think I felt? How do you think it made me feel? I care about you too, just like you care about your parents. It hurts my heart to see you fighting, right? All of that is playing a role within that person's experience. And now that child is coming back and saying, man, next time, Mr. Kaleka is going to have such a long discussion with me. I didn't even want to fight in this class, but but you're also trying to get that kid to understand the why behind what he's doing so that he can break that habit. Because until we understand the why of what we're doing, we can't break that habit, right? Pain without purpose is pointless, but purpose driven from pain is the most powerful. You want to give these kids a chance, and you want to do this with everybody, adults too, to say, why are you doing this? And we're all trying to break away. So critical thinking, I don't think it's just it's more difficult to do it with the younger generation, especially in moments of heat and in the moments of, like, when they're just at it, right? But there's also creative ways to, like, get to, like, 8-year-olds and 7-year-olds, and so I don't think there's ever, like, that's a great question. I don't think there's ever a young enough age. There's a lot of studies saying meditation, conflict resolution, mediation, restorative circles, all of the spiritual practices, even being introduced to spiritual practices at a very young age, healthy spiritual practices. I don't mean proselytizing and all of this. Like, I'm saying that, like, giving a child God. I had one child, right? Like, he was super young, super angry. Right? I was working with him, and I, like, asked him. I said, why are you so mad all the time? And he's like, man, I don't know who my biological parents are. I was adopted, and so he was going into, like, I was, he was basically telling me that he didn't feel loved enough, even as a child. Like, a child should feel loved enough to not be rejected by his own parents so that they give him up for adoption. And then I asked him, I said, are you, and I told him, I said, I got both biological parents, but I don't belong to my parents. I was like, you think they sat up all night thinking about, what skin complexion I'm going to have, how handsome I'm going to be, my nose and my eyes and everything like that? And he's like, no, I guess they didn't think about that when, they were having sex. And I said, no, they didn't think about that. But you know what? Who thought about that? Who are we really children of? And have them come to the conclusion that we are all children of God, whether we were adopted, whether we weren't adopted, whether we got biological. And what that makes them understand is that there's unconditional love. And if they can feel unconditional love and acceptance, then they can give it too. So I think all of those things, to teach critical thinking is to teach consciousness of God's love. And we can do that at any age. Great question.
The next question is going to come from Anita Warfield, and I guess she has her hand up and raised, and she wants to pose a question to you. This is the open question portion of this for the next 15 minutes. Anita?
Hi, you see my hand go up?
Hey sis, how you doing?
How you doing?
Good. Well, I wrote down a question.
You're welcome to ask, Anita.
Okay, so I'm a friend of Sue. We grew up in a city in Wisconsin together, west of Milwaukee, and it was pretty much highly white American type of people. And so I think I grew up with a lot of pride in our town, in our high school, in our sports teams. But then I went to college in Whitewater, and we had a lot of internationals and people from Milwaukee. And I was shifting to an idea of accepting diversity. And so I think I had inside me a lot of competition type of mentality, that I'm competing against other people, other groups. And then in college, I shifted to wanting to integrate into other international. And I was thinking that if we can have in our society more of an emphasis on honoring people, honoring the elderly, honoring parents, honoring other ethnic groups and people who accomplish things for peace, or just a lot of more of an honor system rather than a competitive kind of society. So what do you think about that? I was thinking about how you were saying mass shooters. Who are they targeting? Are they targeting someone that's innocent, that they would want to be like? Or and you talked about self-protection. Maybe you want to just comment on those things.
Yeah, Anita, thank you so much for that question. And I just want to just let everybody know there is no such thing as a bad question. And I just let's have an open dialogue. But thank you for posing that question. Oh, by the way, I did my some of my undergrad at Whitewater too, and had some of my best days at Whitewater, especially at the downstairs bar. You remember the downstairs bar? Everybody from Whitewater remembers the downstairs bar. So Anita, you pose a question. Down under? No, downstairs. $3 Long Islands. So yeah. That was a different age. That was Anita, when we talk about honoring and with your journey, a lot of us exist in this journey when we are younger, that we don't honor diversity, or we don't honor multiculturalism or other people, or whatever that looks like. A lot of times because we don't honor what's happening internally, meaning that there's something that's missing. And I would challenge anybody to get to a place where they say, you know what? And for your journey, and I'm not trying to pathologize or but you probably got to a place where you were spiritually more whole at a certain point in your life. And then people didn't look like competition anymore. People looked like people look like people, and people look like the essence of what they should look like, which is to be honored, which is to be cherished, which is to be nurtured, which is to be loved. But all of those feelings you felt at that point because you felt them about yourself. Lots of these people who don't honor those other things about other people don't genuinely feel it. They're in a place where and it's hard to say, because sometimes what we want to do is vilify those folks, right? But those people are not spiritually whole. They don't have it. They can advertise it, right? They might speak on it, or they might even, sermon on it, but it doesn't mean. So I would say that, like, your journey and where you got to, you were spiritually whole to the point that you welcomed that and you honored the human experience. And that is a journey some people take and some people don't. And some people will go to their grave not being complete enough to ever welcome another person and say, listen, I can welcome you into my life. I can welcome you into my life. And you, a spiritual challenge that God gives us on this earth is he creates you. And it's easy for us to kind of say, you know what, I can understand the people that look like me, walk like me, talk like me, dress like me, believe in God like me. But the spiritual challenge God gave you was become whole enough, become good enough, well enough to welcome the people that don't look like you, nor walk like you, nor dress like you, nor eat like you, nor believe in God like you, but understand that they believe in the same God as you, and that they embody the same God you embody. And so kudos to you for getting to that place. But I think the sooner that we can teach that to kids, the sooner that we can get to a more loving and healthy society.
Good job. Are there any other questions from any of the participants?
Perhaps I can throw one in, Randall. Okay. Your book, of course, talks about your relationship with Arnold, and which gets me to a larger question, and that's there's sometimes a feeling of superiority among many of us in this group here, because we feel we are sort of anointed with the right thinking, and we look at our friends sometimes who don't think like we do. Now, this doesn't get into a racism issue, but racism results from it. We I think we all know diehard Trump supporters who have been very kind and generous to us and to others in our family and friends. And my question goes to, how do we communicate with some people like that? How do we, in a sense, humble ourselves in our righteousness and try to build communications? Because not all of these people who are acting so insanely are, want to be bad people. Many of them think they are doing the right thing. Your advice?
Yeah, Ken, I think my advice for that would be, don't worry about being right, worry about being effective. And I'll tell you this, I was working with a group of men who were getting out of jail. And these men had particular experiences that were unique to their own, right? So I had a colleague of mine, and she was a diehard feminist. And she, very brilliant, very smart, she got it, right? She was very well read. And some of these men were not. Okay. And some of them had spent 10 years in jail. Some people had done 5-year bids. Some people only were on probation or parole, but they all had some kind of run-in with the criminal justice system. And part of their conditioning was to treat women not the best. Right? And this is what they saw. This is what they were conditioned into. And one of them was talking about an incident that he had where he was protecting his sister. And he basically went back to jail, was on probation, went back to jail because he got into a fight with his sister's boyfriend, because his sister's boyfriend put his hands, meaning that he beat up his sister. And so his sister called him and said, hey, so-and-so beat me up again. And he went over to the house and he beat him up and he went back to jail. And the person that was with me, she criticized him in front of him and said, that's not what you need to be doing. you don't need to be protecting your sister. You need to let your sister protect herself or make her own choices. She needs to get herself out of those relationships. Now, mind you, this person just did 5 years for doing this and was in our class and was very raw from the pain of doing 5 years. Doing 5 years in a criminal justice facility is not easy to do. And now what we did was invalidate his existence and what he meant and the things that he held dear because of our need to be right. And then what happened was an argument broke off between him and this person. And at the time, they're arguing, it's derailing the class. The class is trying to learn, and they're like, people are in sort of mental health treatment, right? And it's getting to a place where they're yelling at each other. The one is yelling to the other one, saying that, you know, you should, like, men shouldn't be like that, and women need to be empowered. And he's yelling at her and saying, you don't understand the experience of being a Black man because you're a white woman. And I'm watching this in real time, and you know, I had to ask her to kind of leave. I'm saying, could you walk out? Can you just let me talk with the group of men? And mind you, she might have felt a certain kind of way too, because these were all men and she was the woman in this class, right? Teaching this class. And I said, then she basically got upset at me and says, well, you need to defend me. And I said, what you need to understand is there's moments, and I'm like, you are right. You are brilliant. You are smart. You are educated. You get everything about the white woman feminism theories. You know, you're scholarly, you're well-read, all of these things, but you're not effective. And at that moment, she kind of understood that being effective means that you have to meet that person where they are and then bring them over. So I would say, Ken, for those situations, don't give up on being right, but focus on being effective and bring them towards you, bring them towards that light, bring them towards, because you are, and everybody on this call, you are all wise. You are all, I mean, you all get it, but I would say you want to gently bring somebody towards you. And I think that time exists right now, because there are so many people that we need to revisit having conversations with. There's so many relationships that have broken off in the past 4 years that we need to come back and say, hey, let me understand that you're limited in the amount of information that you're limited, right? Other people are just limited. Trump supporters maybe just, a bit limited. So I think bringing them over and showing them that the door is open for them to kind of join you on, I won't say the right side, I'll say the light side, meaning it's a bit more illuminated where you're sitting, Ken.
Thank you, Pardeep. We're at the time. I, on behalf of Rid Racism, our board members, as well as the activists and participants here, I want to thank you for a very thought-provoking discussion. I truly appreciate you coming tonight, as well as answering each question with sincerity and integrity, if you will. There's going to be a couple of announcements from Ken as well in regards to the pre and post survey. We tried to have a link set up for you all for the participants, but for some odd reason there was the technology that wasn't there. But we will be asking for your email address so we can have you do a pre and post survey. Is there anything Ken and or Jaime?
So I can cover a little bit on the survey, but I'd like to. We do have a few minutes, so I'd like to take the opportunity to ask one more question, if you will, Pardeep. And this is about police reform. I served in the military, so I have a little bit of perspective of of how that works. You were a police officer, I believe, for 7 years. And I'd like to get your perspective on, you wrote a little bit about how at the academy, they broke you down and build you up. And my question has to do with implicit bias, because we all have them, and especially, if we live in those of us who lived in a bubble in the suburbs, and all of a sudden we're introduced to Milwaukee, we had those biases, stereotypes. What's your opinion on how do we reform our new cops, but also our existing cops? And I understand community partnerships is important, but without having dealt with our implicit biases and prejudices, it's hard to, I believe it's hard to manage. So I'd like to get your perspective on that.
Sure. I think policing is difficult, as well. Other things are difficult, but I think some of the things that we can do right away, when somebody gets out of the police academy, you can have them spend about 2 weeks with community organizations, not go straight into the streets. So not directly go straight into the streets, but learn about alternative methods to incarceration. The other thing that we can do is twice a year, police officers have to serve in what's called an in-service. And an in-service, they do a lot of trainings around, shooting firearms training and other stuff. Make it that mental health screenings are mandatory, not just an elective, or not something that just happens after a shooting, or make it, and not even just, don't even just stop at mandatory mental health screenings. Make it that mental health treatment is ongoing and mandatory for all police officers. That it's not just like, you can't opt out of it. You have to do it, right? The other thing that we need to do is we need to break down the bureaucracy of policing. It can't be so much of a disconnected system. Have accountability at each one of the districts. So if you have 7 districts in Milwaukee, each one of those needs to be operating. Each one of them needs to be accountable to the stakeholders in that community. They should have ongoing discussions within what is working, what's not working, who's not working. And again, like, if I was to choose a recipe for disaster, it would be policing in America. And I'm not saying that to criticize the actual officers, or even, I'm just saying that you have implicit biases as you're going into the career of policing. Those implicit biases are reinforced because you're only getting called to negative calls, right? So now if you're in a community that has a high segregation of Black Americans, and you already have implicit biases about the worth of Black Americans, and they're being reinforced to you, and so those people that that so much, and there's testing that can be done to kind of figure out who has the most of these implicit biases, right? Who's like really, and take them out of that district, transfer them into a place where they'll better serve whatever they need to serve. They need to, and again, being careful on the screenings of police officers, looking for things or indicators that is going to show you that this police officer might be a heightened risk. There are courageous police officers, and there are sometimes scary police officers, meaning that some police officers are not meant for the career of policing, even though they've gone into policing. And I think that shows within the first couple of years to say, this person is not handling the streets well. What do we need to do to like either help them or transition them out of this career? So those are some of the things, but there's so many things that you can do. I think I can write probably a 20-page paper on just what we can do.
Yeah, and there's the other issue right now that's very relevant on the blue wall. Oh, I forgot what it's called, the blue line, where it's very rare, like in the Floyd case, that an officer actually gave witness against another officer. And how do you think we can get rid of this and hold officers accountable and each other accountable in a easier way? Because I know a lot of them are pressured to follow that line. Yeah,
there is pressure. I think that they can understand what those psychological sort of pressures are, because it's not just, you know, and within anyone that identifies with any uniform visual property, meaning that sometimes we identify with people of different skin complexions, say, okay, these are my people. Officers identify with other blue uniform people because they think that that's my people, right? So their in tribe is sort of like that thin blue line that you're talking about. But sometimes what's happening, so I think what I would encourage police departments to do is say, hey, you will not, it's hard to dictate who will be friends outside of policing, meaning that, like, I was lucky that I didn't keep a lot of police officers as friends outside of the job, if that makes sense. You need to have, you can't just surround yourselves with a policing culture. It's kind of like a military personnel surrounding themselves by all military people. It doesn't lead to like a life that's critically thinking about your existence and all of that. It doesn't keep you protected nor healthy. So I think some of those things are possible, but it's difficult. It's really difficult to keep accountable the officers that need to keep accountable. But each police department does know who the risky officers are. Believe me, like you know who is a risk for the next shooting. Most districts know that, right? And I'll say, when I was at 7, I didn't want to work with those officers because I just, you know, but that didn't mean that I went and kind of notified my superiors about those officers. So maybe that was my being a coward, right? Where I should have said, hey, I think this person is of risk. But each department knows who the risks are. Just like, I mean, we know in the corporate culture who the liabilities are.
Well, thanks. Thank you. So on behalf of my co-chair, Lisa Jones, and the board, I'd like to thank you. You know, maybe I give them a thumbs up. Appreciate everything. I echo everything what Randall said. We appreciate your forthright. Just to let everybody know that we mentioned this a little bit before, but we do have a new website, and we have a sign up link on there. We also have a Facebook page and a newsletter that comes out, and the area's largest social justice calendar. So please feel free to look at the material, participate with us. We're looking for extra bodies so we can be have more capacity and reach out to more people. We're going to send you a link to a survey. On that survey, we're also going to ask you first how we can improve. Second, what are ideas on future book clubs or workshops or panels? I mean, I'd love to have Pardeep on a panel to talk about police reform, right? He's got that experience and he has that community relations. So stuff like that, we can have more conversations in Milwaukee, which is what we need. So anything else I missed from the board? Or let me first acknowledge our committee. So Sue Bartenstein is on our committee, Liz Caldwell, Ali Randall, and Ken Germanson. So everybody give them thumbs up. We met a few times and it was a wonderful experience, and we're looking forward to more experiences, more Zoom book clubs. Anything I missed from the board?
I just want to say, in regards to your question, there is a great book, Pardeep, written by Jennifer Elberhardt, titled Bias, the Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice that Shapes What We See, Think, and Do. And this is by a scholar who went to Harvard and lives in Oakland, California. And she's working with police officers in that area. So I appreciate your insights to that. And then on behalf, personally, Pardeep, I want to thank you. I know you I probably got on your nerves with asking you questions and making sure you're going to be here and doing things of that nature. But on behalf,
it's all good.
Yeah, I got you. We got to get it done. But on behalf of the Rid Racism and all of the participants, I want to thank you all for coming. This has been quite the experience for me.
Thank you, Randall, and thank you, everyone. Honestly, just keep doing what you're doing. Support Rid Racism, support Micah, and all of the work that needs to be done in this community. So thank you so much, Randall. No problem on the phone call, man. Anytime.
I would like to just add that we will have a recording of this available, and I'll have a link probably within 24 hours, which we'll put on our website and Facebook page. And for those of you, we will be sending out a survey to all of those who pre-registered. And if you did not pre-register, please send us your email address at ridracism@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, good night, family.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you so much, Pardeep. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pardeep.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.